Oh, recording in progress. Okay. All right. Welcome to the first session on React. I'm sure everyone has been looking forward to this the last few weeks, and you've done the weekend work. Pretty much make a simple React app. I think they make you redo Tweeter, don't they? Like in a day in React. And plus we've built a couple components. And right now it's a bit overwhelming. We're doing things like Storybook, we got this testing going, we got this React open. So the first day or so is kind of a lot of stuff. It does settle down after about tomorrow. We use Storybook really for the first 2 days, and then we don't use it so much. We pretty much putting Storybook away after tomorrow. And but today and tomorrow is a fair bit of work. Tomorrow especially. Every couple of months, I go through the React curriculum myself, starting from scratch. And I always remember that Tuesday's work is a lot of building components. And in typical Compass fashion, the instructions become more and more vague as we go along. Not that Compass is famous for being incredibly precise anyways, but it seems it's even more challenging this week. So why don't we get started with React? Now, has anybody done some reading on what React is? I'm sure people have read a bit before this class. What I want to do is to get everyone in the chat, if you get a chance, to write down the one thing that baffles you about React the most. There's the usual suspects. So what one thing can you think of that bothers you, or you've had a hard time wrapping your head around with React? So someone start. Hooks. Hooks is a fun one. Yes, we'll be doing a lot of hooks. We're doing one hook today, as a matter of fact. Anything else? So hooks is definitely one of the usual suspects. Write these down here. So hooks. And sure, class versus functional. Talk about that and why we use functional now. We don't use class-based components. Anybody heard of this? Oh, passing things to other things. Which pass things, other things, back to other things. Yes, that's right. Props. Yes, props, props, props. What are props? And why are they there? And why are they making my life miserable? We will spend quite a bit of time on props, because really that is the thing that gives people the most grief this week. And by the way, and state, yes, state. Oh, we're covering off everything we're going to cover today. Awesome. By the way, my microphone sucks today. I have my wireless headset, but I can't find the dongle. My computer died on me a couple of weeks ago, and I got my brand new computer. And I put it all together, and this morning I'm going like, where's that dongle for the Wi-Fi thing? Can't find it. So there's a bit of an echo in my voice right now, so I do apologize for that. So, all right. Maybe they'll edit that out in post-production. We'll see. Maybe make it look like Brad Pitt too. So, all right. So, yeah, sound good still, sure. Very kind. Extra points for Logan. Okay. So React, the one thing I want to start with React is not scary, okay? It's not what you think it is. It's not as big as you think it is. It's not as hard as you think it is. It's really not much of anything. It's actually a pretty small library. So if we compare React to the other libraries, we've used two so far, haven't we? We've used jQuery with Tweeter, and we've used EJS, Express, using templates in EJS. So jQuery being the most recent, let's make a comparison between that. So who wants to give me a comparison of what the major difference is between something like jQuery and something like React? You've done the reading. So kind of the one-word difference in React versus jQuery. Who wants to start with that?
I would say, yeah, Brandon Copeland got it in there. Declarative versus imperative.
That's right. That's exactly right. Declarative versus imperative. Joyce, what does that mean? You did the reading, and they talk about, I think they use the address example versus the directions to my house, where here's my, here's how to get to my house. Turn left on this street, take the second right, third left, and I'm the fourth house on the right. That's how to get to my house. Whereas declarative is simply telling people, this is my address, figure it out, right? That's declarative. Well, jQuery, of course, is imperative. You have to tell it to do every little thing. Oh, you want that to be a different color? You got to change that color. You got to find that element, you know, dollar, pound, div, ID, change the color, which, you know, set the class, there, color changes, or set the value of that input. Okay, well, dollar, quote, dot class of my input, val equals a string, or get the value. I need to get the value of that string. So everything is done manually. We manipulate the DOM manually. So that's one thing about jQuery that's a little difficult. How do people like jQuery? Did you guys like jQuery? Was it fun? Or did you find it really, really hard? Kind of so a lot of DOM manipulation. Personally, I find jQuery kind of hard. I mean, I've done it a lot and I can do it now, but it's just a lot of work to get a lot of stuff done. You have, like I said, you have to go dollar my thing dot, and then all those functions. And jQuery has a crap load of functions. There's like inner HTML, outer HTML, there's val, there's ones I don't know. There's tons of stuff. React, way simpler. Doesn't have any of that stuff. So I find jQuery much harder than React because jQuery is simpler. Because it's declarative, you don't have to worry about all the gory details of how things are positioned. You don't have to go find an input and grab its value and change its value and then get its value, count the characters, none of that stuff. So anybody remember our EJS in our tiny app? Let's pull up one here. Anybody remember this stuff? Whoa, there's a blast in the past. Look at that, tiny app. Where am I? I'm main here. I've got a bunch of things. That's good. One main class. Let's go to day 2, updating URLs. There we go. All right. So this was our template for EJS. It was called an EJS template, which was really HTML with a bunch of stuff, kind of like a form letter. And that's what EJS was. You build your HTML because this really is just HTML, but it has some funky stuff going on. It has these, you know, pointy bracket things going on in the middle, which is kind of cool, which means you can kind of put stuff in there that you pass to it as a template var, really a JavaScript variable, which is kind of cool. So React is actually much, much closer to this EJS than it is to jQuery. So if you are fairly comfortable using EJS, you're going to love React because it's even simpler than this. It's kind of a combination of the best parts of jQuery and the simplicity of an EJS template. So for example, I didn't have to, you know, decide where to put that URLs thing. I just put it there. There it is. And whatever my URL variable just happened to be would just appear there magically. I didn't have to find that TD by ID. I didn't have to set its inner HTML. It was just there. That's what's called a template. So EJS is partially, not fully, but partially declarative. You say, I want my, you know, URL there. I want my, you know, list there. Of course, you still have to do some stuff like you have to do a for loop inside it. So it wasn't totally declarative. You had to build things, but it was pretty good. All right. So let's talk about first some of the kind of the basics and background of React. So as we know, React is fast, and we've read it's fast because of the virtual DOM. Everyone heard of the virtual DOM? Sounds like a Godfather kind of thing, the virtual DOM. It's the virtual DOM. Of course, it's a memory copy of the browser's contents. And if something changes in the virtual copy, React will then simply patch the browser's copy, which makes it really, really fast. I wrote a a check processing, a check scanning application about a year and a half ago for a bank. And we were scanning checks like really fast, like, you know, 1 a second or 1 to a second, that kind of thing. And I had a screen that showed the check on the screen as it was being scanned. And I kind of wrote the same thing in jQuery and the same thing in Vue, which is very similar to React, very similar with the virtual DOM. And you could see the difference. Even though jQuery is really fast, you could still see the flicker on the screen. Flicker, 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 flicker. It was hard on the eyes. But with a library like React, using a virtual DOM, it was just smooth. They just changed. It's like everything flowed really nice. It was just amazing to watch. So if you thought animations were great in React, or sorry, in jQuery, they're even better in React. Things are very, very smooth because when a change is made in memory, and memory is really fast. So when you run one of your components, it runs amazingly fast. And the DOM is kept in memory, which is also amazingly fast. The browser, on the other hand, is not so amazingly fast. It takes a while to rebuild its DOM because it has to display everything, and display takes time. It's a physical device. So when you render something to it, and you're going to hear that word a lot, render. So everyone practice saying render because we use it a lot. Render and re-render. And if you have trouble saying R's like me, it can be a real pain. So anyway, watch the Princess Bride and the guy doing the wedding marriage, right? Well, that's kind of like me too. So Wender or Barry on Big Bang or Bowie. So re-render and render. When that happens and the browser tries to render, it's fairly slow because it's a physical device. It has to set pixels, it has to do stuff. But in memory, it's amazingly fast. So when a change takes place to your component, like you change a color, maybe you change a button's color from displayed to disabled, was kind of gray. Well, that's a change. And of course, that change is rebuilt in the virtual DOM, which is in memory. And the React goes, oh, wait a second, there's been a change. Okay, let's look what's in memory and compare that to what's in my browser's DOM. Oh, well, it's all kind of the same. Oh, wait a second, there's a little change up there. So what it does, it builds a little patch and sends that to the real DOM, which changes only that thing on the screen. So just those letters, just those items, and just that. And so now the real DOM only has to change that part, which makes it very, very fast. So instead of changing the whole screen, re-rendering, which is what jQuery is doing, it's actually re-rendering. It's still fast, but not as fast as React, because now it's only rendering, physical rendering, that part of the screen, amazingly fast. So, okay. So, talk a bit about components. Let's talk about class-based components. When you go on the internet, you will almost always see class-based components in React. That is the old school way of doing React apps. We will not be doing that in this first 10 days. In the last day of React, we will get you used to seeing a couple of class-based components, and they're kind of cool. You can do some cool things with them. State is managed differently. But for the most part, we're doing things the modern way, which is using functional components. Now, this is very important. When you do your final project, I'd strongly discourage you from downloading React code from the internet, because chances are it's a bunch of class-based components that some guy wrote 8 years ago or 5 years ago that probably were crap anyways, but now they're crap class-based components and they're not going to fit. You're going to go, oh, this thing looks great. You're going to download, get it working, and then, oh, I need help. You're going to call a mentor, go, I need some help with this stuff. He's going to look at it going like, what the heck's this? You downloaded this, didn't you? Because it's a bunch of class-based components. So avoid that in your finals. We'll talk about more of this in a few weeks, but we use the newer way, which is functional components. Now, there are examples online, functional components and functional examples, which you can use, but I do encourage you to write your own code in finals. So class-based components, they were the original way of doing components in React, and they worked fine. You had a class, you had some stuff, you had a template, you had your render function, and everything worked great. but they were kind of hard to debug. They were just a bear to find what the problem was. And it's less efficient as well. So instead, we moved to functional components. It was a couple of years ago now. And so relatively new, but they take getting traction. And now pretty much everything new you're going to see in React is going to be functional components. Okay. And by the way, what is a component? Well, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but really a component is part of your web page. If I pull up a web page, let's pull up Google. There we go. Pretty much everything you see on that page is a component. There's an input component, probably has a lot more going on behind the scenes. There is some kind of bar component. It has 2 button components in it. So a component is just part of your page. A button, an HTML button, is a component. It's a built-in component, but it's still a component. So websites are built of components. And in React, we get to make our own components. In jQuery, we didn't. You couldn't build your own component. You had to use what you got out of the box of HTML, didn't you? You had the button. You had to use a button. You can style the button. You can put it inside a div and make it look kind of cool. But really, it was like pointy bracket button, and that's what you got. Or pointy bracket div, pointy bracket a, pointy bracket input. That's kind of what you got. That's what you had to use. With React, we get to design our own pointy bracket stuff and call them whatever we like. Pretty sure we've all built the uppercase B button component already, haven't we? As a start of our project. They make you build this button. They spend a lot of time helping you build this button. That's a component. It's based on the HTML button because at the end of the day, everything boils down to HTML and JavaScript because that's all that a browser can do. So no matter what component you make, no matter how complicated, at the end of the trail, there is sitting some HTML component, button, list, div, a, something like that. All right. So enough theory for now. Let's start building ourselves a component. So I'm going to go ahead and open up there we go. Okay, so to build a React app, and you probably read this, we use the create React app script. You can build them from scratch. It's fairly simple. There is workspaces you can do. Ultimately, all you need is index.html and the React library. But the most common way of building a React app is to create a React app. To do that, we use npx. Has anybody not used npx yet? Anybody not used npx? npx, of course, just lets you run a executable module without having to install it. Anybody used nodemon or nodemon, as I like to call it, nodemon? You probably remember in TinyApp, we installed node monitor to run our TinyApp app, so it would check when things change and we can refresh it. Well, you can npx nodemon too. So in fact, what I often do, I very rarely install nodemon in my projects. I go npx nodemon, and in my package.json, I add the line npx nodemon, index whatever .js, and it runs nodemon. Takes a few seconds longer to run, but it's not installed in my project, which makes my project a little lighter as well. So npx just lets you run an executable from a module without actually having to install that module. And there's a module, the create React scripts, which is part of React, or was written for React, and has a bunch of cool scripts that let us do a bunch of React stuff. One of the most common things we use it for is to create a React app. So, of course, the script is called create React, just like that. So if I run this thing, I've got to give it a name. I'll call it, new app. So npx create React app, and then the name of your app. In this case, new app. So it's going to run. npx is going to start, and the first thing it's going to do is going to actually download the scripts. It's going to go and grab the React scripts, and now it's going to run the create React script, and install everything I need to develop a React app. It's a complete React development environment. It's pretty big. It's like 200 megabytes of stuff. And that's an understatement, okay? It will take a few minutes. I'll probably stop it because I haven't built one already last night on my machine, but it does take a while. So we won't let it go the whole way. So now you may be telling yourself, 200 megabytes? Does that mean my website's going to be 200 megabytes? When people click on my app, it's going to download 200 megabytes? No, it's not, of course. It's the complete React development environment that contains a bunch of things. All the React things you might want to use, things like all the libraries, all the hooks you want to use, the React, modules themselves. Also downloads two other things we'll talk about more in detail. Something called Webpack. Has anybody heard the term Webpack before? In the chat, anybody? You heard the word Webpack? It's something you hear a lot, and you might be asked in an interview, what's Webpack? It's like, oh, I don't know. Webpack is a little server. It's a server that it's a lot like NodeMon, actually. It's kind of a really smart version of NodeMon. Webpack, you can run your file with Webpack, but not only that, but it creates kind of a WebSockets connection between your browser and itself. And when you change a file, that's cool. NodeMon does that. It restarts itself. But in this case, it doesn't restart itself. It simply reloads that file in memory and sends a signal to your browser saying, oh, look, this has changed. Re-render yourself. So it's kind of a NodeMon on steroids version. It's really cool. It's an Express-based app. And it's what you get when you create a React app using the React scripts. That's Webpack. It's like a server. And because one thing I want to emphasize is React deals with the view. So with React, what is it? It deals with the view. Anyone heard the term MVC before? MVC stands for Model, View, and Controller. Anybody heard that term? It's a common pattern we used kind of back in the day when we had these all-in-one applications, much like TinyApp is. It has the database, which is your class that you had. It has the view, which is your EJS templates, and it has the controller, which is your JavaScript. So the view part is what the person sees on their browser. So that is the view. So React deals solely with the view. It doesn't concern itself with databases. You can't do database with React because it's on the browser. So there's no Postgres database on your person's machine. Oftentimes in finals, we get the question, I can't for some reason get my React app to do a PG query. What am I doing wrong? Well, of course, your React app is running on the user's browser. They could be 1,000 miles away. They are certainly not connected to your PG database. Certainly hope not. That means they got the password and everything. So no, it is the view only. And as such, it can only do whatever the browser runs on the browser only. It doesn't do anything that the browser cannot do. So it can't do databases. It can't do anything. All it can do is HTML and JavaScript. So if JavaScript can't do it, your app can't do it. And they have no access to the outside world other than using AJAX calls, much like jQuery made AJAX calls from our Twitter app to our Twitter backend. We have a similar thing we do in React as well. So Webpack refreshes the view as it goes. The other part that you get when you build a React app using Create React App is you get something called Babel. And Babel is another server that runs, and it, much like the name implies, it translates between JSX, which we'll talk about shortly, and what your browser can actually understand, because this is important, your browser only knows HTML, JavaScript, and some CSS. That's it. Without some special things installed in your browser, it doesn't know anything else. That's all it can do. So Babel translates all of our cool React-y stuff into HTML and JavaScript. So Webpack, of course, serves that information, takes what Babel is giving it and sends that to your browser. So your development is you make some JSX, because React is not quite JavaScript and not quite HTML. It's kind of combined. We call it JSX. So Babel translates that into CSS, JavaScript, and HTML, sends that to Webpack. Webpack sends to you. Okay, well, that's all great for development environment. But in the real world, when you actually have a running website, you haven't got Webpack. That 200 megabytes of stuff is not available. It's not there anymore. When we build a React app, we actually build it and package it up into a nice tight little package of HTML and JavaScript. It is just HTML and JavaScript and some CSS. There is no more Webpack. There's no more Babel. It is a handful of files that say HTML and JavaScript, some other stuff. And those can be read directly with a browser. So when you have a React application, it has to run on something. It has to run on some server, like an Apache server or an Nginx server, or maybe a Node server. But if it's a Node server, that Node application, all it's doing is simply sending that static HTML to the browser. It's not doing any work itself. The only job of the server is to send that React app to the browser, then its job's done. It's out of the picture. In fact, you can actually open a React app with a browser directly off your hard drive if you want to. So really important to remember that React runs only on the browser. So we run a create React app and we get a bunch of stuff, including our Babel. Let's take a look. I built one last night right here. There we go. There's my new app. But here's what I built last night. Let's take a look at this one. Let's look at the node modules for this particular application. Look at that. I'm still on the bees. It just goes on and on. There's tons and tons of stuff. So you want to call Babel in here? Let's take a look. There we go. A bunch of Babel stuff. Wow. Look at all that stuff. So lots of stuff. Hundreds of megabytes of a development environment. It's a complete development environment for you to develop React apps in. A lot of which, or most of which, will not end up in your final product, of course, because there's a lot of stuff, right? Like that's tons of stuff. Look at that. Wow. Oh, look at that. Webpack. Cool. Webpack, Babel, the rest. I don't know. What is that stuff? I don't know. Don't know. Okay. So let's look at what you get when you build a React app. Okay. So let me just go here. I'll just undo this. Let me go here. By the way, I encourage you at some point, you might want to, create React app. At some point, we might have a talk about connecting your VS Code to your GitHub and your Git. It makes your life real easy. Things like changing branches. Oh, there's a bunch of branches in my file here. Okay, well, I can change branches very easily. So maybe we'll have a talk about that later on. For now, it's perfectly fine to use command line Git and even your Vagrant doing Git. Okay, so let's look at what we get in a React app. We install or we run create React app. We get a bunch of stuff in our directory. We get a public folder and we get a source folder. In the public folder, we get a bunch of stuff. Okay. And really all we care about here, we get index.html. All of this other stuff, it's nice to have and we might want to use it. A fave icon is kind of cool. Nice to have a little icon in the browser. These logos, that's just for this demo to give you. Manifest, same thing. A robots.txt, that's just for controlling web crawlers like Google when they want to look at your site. But really, that's the only file we care about is index.html. In our source directory, a bunch more stuff. But really, the only things we really care about are our app.js and our index.js. Those are the two main files. So what we commonly do when we create a React app using create React app is we prune this stuff out. Because we're not doing test today, so I'm going to delete the test file because I don't really care about that. So I can delete that file and maybe some other files. So what I do, I usually clean this up. In fact, I used to make a little clean React app. So let's look at the clean. Now my clean app there, I've got rid of everything except index.html, index.js, and my main component, which is called app, which we'll explain in a few minutes. And that's it. So of course, every website needs an index.html. That's what browsers read. They read index.html. Let's start there. So that's where the browser would start. We'll start with index.html. And there's not much to it, as you can see. I mean, there's a head. We've seen that before. And it's got some meta, UTF-8, sure. Yeah, it loads the fave icon. I kept it around because it's kind of cute. I like the Create React app or the React icon, so I kept that around. There was some viewport stuff. We've seen that before. Some color, a description. My new app. I can call it my new app. Sure, that's what you'll see on the title bar, and of course the title bar as well. And it's got a body. Okay, which has two things in it. Like that's it. The body of a Create React app has two things. It has a no script. Anybody know what a no script does? The no script tag. This is a blast from the past. I want to get one answer in the chat. Anybody seen the no script tag before and where it came from? Come on, somebody. No, I don't know. No script. Yes, it shows up at JS. Oh, wow, cool. Yes, history buff. Yes, that's exactly what it does. No script. Well, I mean, it kind of gives it away, doesn't it? No script, which sounds incredible, doesn't it? Like, what do you mean no script? How is that possible? Well, back in the day, which I still remember, when browsers first came out, when JavaScript first came out, which was a number of years ago, it's like, wow, this thing called JavaScript, what is it? Well, it makes stuff, like do stuff on a computer. Like, what? This website's now doing stuff, like running software on my computer? What the heck? I don't want that. That sounds really, really scary. So the browsers at the time, good old Netscape and Internet Explorer and a couple others, they said, fine, okay, we'll give you an option to turn off JavaScript. And by the way, that option is still there. In most browsers, you can turn JavaScript off in your browser to make you feel much more safe. So incredible as it seems, you could disable JavaScript, which for at the day or at the time was not a huge problem because most sites function pretty well without JavaScript. You might miss a few things. You might not get the little scrolling thing at the bottom, like those annoying banners that scrolled across. I hated those things, man. So, or other stuff, but the website worked. So just in case, React puts in this no script saying you need to enable JavaScript, buddy, or this thing ain't gonna run. Okay, so that's what that's for. And the second part is a div, and that's it. That's the entire body. It's a div with an ID of root, and that's important. We'll come back in a minute. Now, of course, we know in IDs in jQuery we can find that ID and put stuff there, can't we? We've done it. So our entire React application consists of a single div with an ID called root, or an ID of root, and our entire app lives inside here. That is our entire React app. All of it lives inside that div. Okay, so that's index.html. Of course, no index.html would be complete without an index.js. Let's look at index.js. There we go. Index.js. And this is what they build for you when you have a Create React app. And let's take a look. Well, there's not much to it. It's importing React, because you've got to have React. So it imports React, the React library. And notice it's using the import keyword. It is not using require. Very important. Remember, sometimes people will make the mistake and they'll go, oh, require, blah from this, right? And it crashes because your browser has never heard of the word require. There is no require in a browser because this code, of course, runs in the browser, not in Node. require is a node keyword for doing node server-side stuff. In a browser, we use the import keyword. So import React DOM, more React. Import our index CSS. Oh yeah, we got an index CSS, sure. We got some CSS there. They build us one for free. Not much to it, really. Okay, and then import app. We'll talk about that later. So we import the component app. And then it says render. And by the way, it does wrap your app in this strict mode. I don't usually keep that. You can. It helps some stuff, but really, that's what's happening. Okay, that's the stuff you get to help with development, strict mode. But to make things clear today, I'm just going to remove that right now. There. So it says render, and the render function, in other words, it runs the React render function once. Okay, it says, okay, render, and the render takes, or render function takes two parameters. It takes a component, and it takes, well, an element, right? An HTML thing. It says get element by ID. Now, I think we've all seen this particular one, haven't we? Remember back in prep, we did a bunch of this stuff. Get element by ID. So document, which is the main document in our index HTML, it says get element by ID root. Okay, it says great. Okay, let's do that. Get element by ID. Where's a thing called root? Oh, there it is. Okay, great. It will find that div with ID of root, and will render the app component inside it. So really, that's what index.js does for you. That's all it does. For the most part, we don't have to touch any of these files. I've cleaned it up, like I took out the strict mode stuff, and I know reform it. Really, we don't need to touch this at all. And we oftentimes we just don't, right? Same with index. We don't, no, doesn't have to be touched. We very seldom concern ourselves with these files that were built for us. The only thing we really care about is our app. So remember we talked about the app component being rendered inside our div? Well, that's what happens. And the app component lives in the file app.js, or sometimes called application.js. They're interchangeable. The create React app script calls it app.js. I know in the scheduler app it's called application.js. It's the same thing. It's your top level component. And yes, app is a component because React is all about components. So index.js renders one component, the app component, which can contain more components, contain HTML, built-in components, and your own components. Components being essentially stuff with pointy brackets. That's a component. So let's look at app.js. Okay, so there is an app.js. So before we go, let's start this React app with what we get from out of the box from create React app. I'm going to start this. So I'm going to go npm start. We've done this before. That's how we start a React app. And what I've done is I've changed my my code back to what I got from my create React app script. So it's really, this is out of the box. So I'm going to start my React app from the out of the box condition, npm start. Oh, hold on. CD is called my app. There we go. Let's do it again. npm start. Okay. So it'll do a couple stuff. Starts the development server, starts Webpack going, and there we go. It's running. And this console, we don't need it ever again. There. So if there are some of you still remaining that do this and expect to run npm start here, you should do the following thing. Move your mouse over to that X right there and click it, and don't open it again, because we're not using that console. You should be using a real console. Seriously. We have this open. We have our storybook console open. We'll have our test console open. It's much better to have a console you can move around. You can see stuff. I can make it taller, put some errors, make it smaller. It's just much more efficient. But more importantly is we're software developers. So what is the most important thing on my whole screen? I've got like 3 screens here, sure. But really, the most important thing on my screen is my code. So having that in my way, like how efficient is that to work on my code? It's not, right? So I rarely use that terminal. It's great for doing demos if you want to do a one window demo, but for like real work, I use a terminal. So, all right. So I've started my Create React app using the console, npm start, and it starts the browser on port 3300. It actually fires up a browser form, which is really cool. And now Webpack is running. I can minimize that, and it fires up. This is the kind of the out-of-the-box experience for React app, little spinning atom thing. We see it all the time. So of course, what we do is we clean this up, because unless you feel like having a spinning atom for your app, that's not something you want. So let's clean up our app a bit. Let's just go ahead and remove the stuff we don't want, because this entire function, our entire app lives inside that div. There. So let's look, and we don't need the logo anymore. There we go. Okay. So let's look at the anatomy of a component. App.js is a component. It is the main component. Remember, in XJS, I took up the comments here, it loads our app component inside our root. So app.js, this is our main component. Every React component is a function. It is a JavaScript function. That's all it is. It is not anything magical. It is a JavaScript function, and it runs. Whenever the component renders, this function runs again. It runs the function app, and it returns some stuff. So a lot of the stuff I'll talk about today is, is fun stuff, and you can remember it or not. But there's a couple of takeaways that I'm going to emphasize, and this is one of them. So in a React component, it really has 2 major components, 2 major parts to that component. The first part is where you do stuff, get things ready, kind of like building your template bars in EJS. You get all your stuff ready, and then it has the return. The return is like your template. This is what gets rendered to the browser, the return. So I do encourage you, when you're doing a React component, make sure you at least leave a space or something in between your code that you're writing and your return, just to say, okay, I'm getting ready, and now I'm rendering my component. Think of it like a Broadway play, or off-Broadway play, or way off-Broadway play, in my case, where you spend this time getting you're ready. You hired your actors, you're building all your sets, you're getting your scripts all ready, everything, all the rehearsals are all done, and the return, that's like showtime. Okay, everyone's all set. Okay, and the curtain rises, and there's your app. So although you can do JavaScript stuff inside your template, inside your React app, it's best to do that beforehand. So we try to get everything done before. You'll see a lot of people that do, I see online, they'll be doing like array maps, the map function inside their template, inside the return. Yes, you can do it, but there's a saying in software development: just because you can doesn't mean you should, and particularly in software. So 2 parts to the component. It is the working part, getting things ready, and the render or the return, the stuff that shows up, which implies anything in the return shows up in your browser. So let's say I put something inside here. I'll just say hello. Say hello. And of course, I get the word hello, because anything in my template, whatever is inside that return, is directly mapped onto my browser. And let's take a look. Let's inspect this. Go to our dev tools, and we'll inspect this. There we go. Let's take a look. Okay, so there's my body. Hold on. I've got a div body. There we go. And where's my hello? Oh, hold on. Div hello right there. See? Class equals app hello. There we go. So I've got my div class equals app hello. So let's talk about the first rule. We'll talk about some rules of JSX. And there's a couple of rules because this is JSX. Because as we can see, this is not really looking like real JavaScript because, you know, this is JavaScript. Sure, that's kind of close. And like that's, but what's this? That's not JavaScript. That's JSX. And that's one of the magic things about React. It is programmed in JSX, which is kind of a combination of JavaScript and HTML combined. Because clearly this is not JavaScript, because you couldn't do this in JavaScript because that's not a string. And you know, there's no pointy bracket operator in JavaScript. So this is JSX. And of course, that gets converted to JavaScript by our good friend Babel, who does that in the background. Right now it's doing it live. Later on, it'll do it once when the packages are app up. Right now it's doing it for us live. So when I do something in JSX, that gets converted to HTML and JavaScript. So this part gets converted to HTML. So you got that. So let's talk about the first rule. The first rule is if you want to use a class, I want a class equals app, you can't use the word class. This gets me every time. Every time. I always forget this. I go class equals app. I just forget. Whoops. Try it again. I always do this. Come on. There. I always do this. Just every time. Without fail. Of course, I got a warning, right? I got an error, and React is telling me, it says, oh, class, invalid DOM property class. Oh, did you mean class name? Oh, yes. Why, yes, I did mean class name. Thank you, React. So one thing is cool, the React errors are pretty helpful. Like that's kind of helpful. Better than some other ones I've seen. It's like, you know, unknown or invalid operator at line 4. Like, yeah, so what? Like, it basically, if a node said, yeah, hey buddy, you're missing a curly brace at the end of line 6. You might want to add one. It says no, invalid token found. Like that's not very helpful. React is more helpful. It does say you probably meant to say class name. Class in React is a reserved word, so we can't use it. You know, it's just one of those things. We can't do it. So it does make a class. It translates to class, but we have to use class name when we're doing React. It's one of those rules. Why? There's a good reason for it. I don't know, but we have to do it. So number 1. Okay, let's carry on with some more React stuff. So we have our hello on the screen. So anything, right? You know, if I put a button there, for instance, or put put a button, sure, button. There, and let's say hello inside that button. There we go. Cool. I've now got hello inside a button. That was easy. So that's kind of cool too. Once again, this is JSX. And this is so this looks a lot like EJS, doesn't it? Cool. In fact, something else. We could make a variable. We can go const, we'll call it, you know, hello, why not? Equals the string hello. Just like that. Okay. Well, very much like EJS, we can use that variable inside our template. And the cool thing is we don't have to pass these template vars. They're already there. Like, here's the template, and there's our template var. Like, it's all there. So I can use that hello right here. I can use the hello. Of course, I'm just getting the word hello, right? Which is okay. But what if I called it hello world? Hello world? Well, it still says hello. What have I done wrong? Oh, of course. Anybody? What have I done wrong? I've used my variable, hello.
Do you need curly braces around it?
Big curly braces. Yes. Oh, everyone, yes, exactly. So the number 1 rule, or the second number 1 rule, because they're both very important. I would call this the number 1 rule and the classing number 2 rule. So number 1 rule, which is now superseded the previous number 1 rule, is You must use curly braces whenever you have any kind of JavaScript in your template or inside markup. Markup means you're inside some pointy brackets. Right now, I'm in some pointy brackets here. Once you go pointy, you can't go back, right? Okay, that's it. You can't go back. I'm now inside the pointy world. I can't go back to no curly braces because I've done this, right? I've committed myself. So anything JavaScript now has to have curly brackets or curly braces around it. And I've got my hello world. Now this looks a lot like an EJS template, doesn't it? I mean, it would be like this, wouldn't it? It would be like, pointy bracket equals or percent equals, right? Come on, percent equals, no, percent equals, and then another percent there, and a pointy bracket. And I've got EJS, don't I? It's the same thing. Well, it is. It's a template. They're made to be easy to use. So instead of pointy bracket percent equal, it's curly brace. Same thing, really. So as you can see, React's not that difficult. And really, we've just covered off a whole bunch of React right now. We're going to talk about props and some state and maybe some components, but really those two things, and really this thing, is one of the most important concepts of React. So please don't get overwhelmed by React. The project this week is kind of tricky, but I can guarantee you that 90+% of the problems we have with this week's work is not React problems. It's JavaScript problems. Being able to manipulate objects and arrays and iterate objects and find things inside arrays. That's where people end up having all the problems, which is why we stress those first 2 weeks. And why, of course, I stress that music library exercise in week 1. It is so crucial because you're going to realize in a couple of days, hey, wait a second, this is exactly like the music library. It just has different names. It has like days and interviewers, but it's the same thing. Instead of albums and playlists, it's got like interviews and interviewers. That's it. It's the same object. Okay. So pointy brackets or curly braces on JavaScript stuff. Okay. Now, of course, I can do more than this. I can do even more cool stuff. I could do this. Instead, I could say, I can make a button. It's a variable, a small button. I can make a variable called button, and I could put the whole thing inside there. I could take that whole thing and make that a variable. Right? Of course, I'm not inside there because now I'm here. It's just actually say the word hello. I can't actually embed it yet. Okay, I've got a button with the word hello inside it. Let's go capital H hello. Well, this is clearly not JavaScript, is it? Clearly, because this would be invalid JavaScript. I would have to have done this like that to make it into real JavaScript. That's fine. But now, of course, now it's JS6. If I try to put that button in there, it won't work. So I can put markup inside a variable. You can't do that with EJS, can you? No, you can't. Really cool. So, but you can do it with jQuery. Remember, we could do a create tweet and then append tweet. We would build our tweet in a jQuery variable, $, tweet or tweet equals a bunch of stuff, and then append tweet. So, as I said, React is kind of a combination of the two. Kind of takes the best of both worlds. We can build some stuff, and I can put that right here. I can put my button right there, and of course, it says the word button because I forgot my curly braces. So put curly braces around that, and I get the same thing. So right now I'm going quite slow because I want to emphasize the basics of React and how JSX works. And it's much less intimidating once you understand it really is just like EJS with a bit of jQuery. And once again, the two parts of a component, I'm getting things ready here, and then I'm rendering it. Now, I wouldn't normally build a button like that because that's kind of silly. You might do it some other way, but that's not commonly done. But I'm doing just to point out that you could really put anything inside a variable. Okay, let's make our button do something now, because really, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't. It's kind of a useless button. So now we'll talk more about doing some using built-in components or the HTML components with jQuery. And we'll move for that, and we'll move on to using composite components or more complex components in React. Why don't we take a short break now, and we'll come back in about 10 at the 38 or something, and we'll reconvene then. Sound okay? All right. Okay. Take a quick break, and we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes and carry on with our final React stuff. Okay. Talk to you guys soon. I love that. Recording in progress. Okay. All right. So we left off with our hello button. I changed the CSS on the left. We've got our button. Okay. Your mic sounds like crap. Yes. Thank you. That's awesome. I love that. I got to find that. This dongle is somewhere. I must have dropped it. Driving me nuts. Okay. So we got our button. So a button is like the simplest component in HTML. As I mentioned, at the end of the day, everything boils down to an HTML component. In this case, a button. And of course, a button does stuff. So I'm going to change a button back to the way we had it, because we don't normally put a variable, just a button inside it. We might put like the text. We'll say hello there. Kind of the way we had it before. That's kind of more common. We set up some JavaScript. We'll put the string hello, and we put our, we'll call it button text there. Call it button text. I'll put that inside, whoops, our button. Come on, why is my copy and paste not working? There we go. Okay, and oh, look at that, no curly braces. Okay, right, hello, or click me, exclamation mark. Okay, got a button. It doesn't do anything. So we want a button to do something. Now in jQuery, we would normally do something like, oh, dollar, ID of the button, dot on click, function, a bunch of stuff, right? And that's how jQuery does it. Well, with React, we don't have jQuery. All we have is JavaScript. Fortunately, the HTML components, such as a button, have a bunch of stuff built into it. And one of those things is the on-click attribute. On-click equals, something. Okay. So on-click expects a function. So I'm going to make a function for my button. Right here. Once again, this is the setup part of my component. I'm getting things ready. So I'm going to put my component or my component's function here. I'm going to make a function. So I'm going to make a function called, I don't know, my button clicker or button click. Sure. Good name is any. And I'm just going to log. For now, I'm just going to console log to the word, clicked or button clicked. Button clicked. Button clicked. There we go. Okay. And I can use my function in here. So look at that. Oh, look at that. I've got an error. Being very helpful once again, it says, oh, look at this. JSX value should be either an expression or text. Oh, okay. Not as helpful, but you see this enough to kind of go, yeah, I forgot the curly braces. So there we go. So because my button click is JavaScript, it's a JavaScript thing, right? It's a JavaScript variable in this case. So I have to put that here. So on click equals my button handler, my button click, which is a function. Well, now if I click the button, nothing happens. Let's look at the console log. Let's take a look. So console log, and it did. Let's clear the console. So clear. We'll click our button, and button clicked. The counter goes 1 to 3. There we go. Cool. That's kind of it for buttons. That's what they do. You click them. Okay. That's about as good as it gets for buttons. Okay. Well, that's not very useful to me. So I need my button to do something. So why don't I make my web page actually do something useful now? Useful in a useful air quotes term. I'm going to make a counter. Let's make a const counter equals 0. And of course, I can't spell counter. Counter equals 0. Okay, I have a counter, and I'll put my counter. Let's say, I'll put it down here. Let's say counter equals, and I won't make this again, counter. There we go. Okay. And by the way, let's take a look. Oh, counter equals counter. Let's take a look. I got an error. Or is it just one of those? Oh, unexpected 10. Oh, of course. Yes. There we go. Okay. And come on. There we go. If you get a weird error on the screen in red like that, it might not be your fault. Okay. It might just be that React got confused. Your Babel and Webpack got kind of confused. I'm going to put a div here just to make it kind of separate out a bit. Let's go a div here. There we go. There. Let's do one more thing. All right, let's move this div down to here, like that. Ah, I'm getting a React error again. So this is the number rule of JSX. This number 2 rule. It will supersede the previous number 2, but the number 1, curly braces, that's the number 1. This is number 2 rule, which means you have to have a single parent for everything. So we can't have 2 siblings like this. This is not valid JSX. It will complain. It will say adjacent elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. Did you want a fragment instead? In this case, do I? Probably not. But maybe later we'll put a fragment. So, or I could. Let's do that. Let's put a fragment. Because a fragment lets you have an enclosing parent. There has to be one parent div or something here for this to all work. Otherwise, it won't work. You have to have a single parent. So I could have a div at the beginning of all of this and a div at the end. Like that, and put it at the very end. And now it's happy again because it's got a single parent. So rule number 2 of JSX, 2 of the 3, is everything has to have a single parent. But what's happened now, I've added this div, but now let's look at my div. Got my body, I've got a div there, I got another div there, and another div. It's like, wow, I got all these divs. So this div's kind of pointless. So, maybe that's not really necessary. So instead of that, you can use what's called a fragment. If you get yourself in a situation, we'll do this a little later on, where you just got to have these things, as siblings, you can't really have them separated with a single parent. You put a fragment in there. And there's 2 ways to do this. The easiest way is simply an empty pointy bracket and a closed empty pointy bracket. And that is a fragment. That's all. It doesn't show up in the DOM. So now I've got one less set of divs to worry about. There, see, now it put them right there. There's my app. In this one, I got my root and my app, and there's no fake one in between, which is kind of cool. So, all right. So another rule, elements must have a single parent. Now in this case, I'll just get rid of that. I'll just move these divs into the main part of my div, and it'll work fine. It'll do the same thing. So I have a button and I have a counter. Great. Okay. So now let's make our button do something. Right. We're going to increase our counter by 1 because that's what counters do. Okay. So counter plus. There. Cool. And while we're at it, let's actually put our button clicked, and we're going to counter. I'm going to actually log my counter there. So, counter is a constant. Let counter, because as we know, we use const until we're forced not to. Okay. Cool. So looks like I have a working website here. This is awesome. I have a website with a counter. So let's click on our counter and see what happens. And maybe I missed it. Hold on. Click again. My counter is not changing. So clearly, I've done something wrong, haven't I? Nothing is happening. Let's look at the console log. That'll tell us what's going on. Oh, my counter's going up. It is changing my counter. Look at that. We'll do this again. Click me. I've got 16, but I'm only rendering a 0. So what could possibly be happening? Oh, I need heckling from the crowd here. What's happening here? I'm returning counter. So it's there. But when I click my button, nothing is happening. But clearly, counter is in fact changing. So why is this not rendering? There's a hint actually in that sentence. Why is it not rendering? Well, because it's not rendering. The global counter is being used instead of the one in the function. Well, no, it's counter. There's counter. It's the same one. That's the same counter. Right? It's the same counter. If I said counter equals 5, it'll put a 5 there. So if I click it, it's going to go to 6. So it is the right one. Okay. So clearly something's going on. And the main problem, there's 2 problems going on here. The main problem is this thing's not re-rendering. Nothing happened. Let's prove that to ourselves. I'm going to the console log here, rendering app component. There, component. So whenever this component renders, it's going to print the word rendering app component, just like that. Okay. So nothing can happen until the component renders. So this needs to run again to print out a new copy of my counter. If I change my counter, it didn't get rendered, did it? So it could never get to here again because this never runs again. The return statement, in fact, the whole thing runs when the component renders, which means even though I changed counter here, this whole function didn't run again, which means this return never ran, which means it never rebuilt the stuff and used my new counter. This just stayed there. Remember, when a component renders, it runs the function over again. And this is how React, and this is a key point. When React wants to show something on the screen or change something, it runs your component function again. The whole thing, right from the top, starting at line 3 all the way down to line 22. The whole function runs again, which means it gets the return. It will then print off a div, right? It will then make a button for me with the word click me inside it. It'll put the word counter and it'll put whatever's in counter there. But I'm never getting that console log, which means this component is not rendering. It's not, or re-rendering, or like I say it, or Barry says it, we-wendering. It's not we-wendering, okay? It is not re-rendering. So I can never show that counter here because it's not rendering. It's never getting to this return again. The return ran once and that's it. And by the way, those of you who may have be a little, remember back on week 2, remember the word closures? Oh, not those closure things again. Yes, closures. This is the closure, isn't it? This function is a closure, which means this counter did survive this function running. So when this function ran, this app function, it ran, this button click still has access to that counter, which is why I can do things like that and the counter gets changed. So the counter is changing, but this function is not rendering, or this component is not rendering, so it can't display it. So how do we get a component to render? Or more correctly, what causes a React component to render or re-rendering? Anyone? Change in state? A hook can too. Change in state? Yeah, 2 things cause a component to render. A change in state or a change in props, which we're going to spend a bit of time on a little later. Just a alert, today's session may go a little longer because we have a lot to unpack on React. I don't want to rush things. So, okay. So a change in state. Well, what's state? Well, a state is, well, really, the state is the counter is 5, right? Or the button has the word click me. I'll make it back to 0 again. So now the state of this application or this page is counter is 0, button has click me in it, it's gray, now it's not gray. These are all states, really the state of the page right now. Now, in React, we talk about what the state of your variables, really. So the things that you have variables for. So the state of the button text variable is the string click me. The state of counter is 0. So here's the catch. Even if I could force a re-render of this component, of this app component, what would happen? What would happen if I clicked on that button and went 1 or 2, and I could somehow force a re-render, which means run this function all over again? That means re-render. What's going to happen? Well, the function is going to run, isn't it? It's going to line 3. Remember interview number 2? Trace the following code. Very important skill. We do by line number. Line number 4, it will do console log. Okay. Then it runs line number 6. Set counter equals, oh no, 0. Uh-oh. Okay, button click equals that. New function, return button, and then counter equals 0. So even if I could force a re-render, it wouldn't make any difference. It's still going to be 0 because a re-render means run this function all over again, and it's going to set my counter to 0 again. So it's still going to mess me up. So, and of course, as people alluded to, we need to do some way to handle that situation. We need a variable to survive a re-render. That, of course, is state or use state. There's a hook, one of the first hooks we learned, and this is the only one today, we'll be doing the use state hook. How to make something, a variable, anything really, survive a re-render. That's the purpose of the use state hook. So I can't use let counter because every time the function renders, it's going to run the function all over again, and the counter gets to 0. So clearly, this is not going to work. I need something else. And what we do is we use use state. And it looks like this. Const, and then we do this format. And this looks kind of funny. Counter, comma, set counter equals use state. And initial value of 0, just like that. So has anybody seen this? This is what's called object destructuring. It's just a quick way of grabbing the 2 items that useState returns. useState returns an array. The useState function, which is a React hook built into React, is the most common hook we use, and it returns an array of 2 things. It returns an array with number 1, the value, a value, and the second thing it returns is a function that lets you save that value, or set that value, so you can get it out next time you run useState. It gives you back the same value in counter. No, I mean, really, const array equals useState. Yeah, and I get array, const value equals array 0, and const function equals array 1. There, oops, 1. Just kind of a long way of doing the same thing. But if you get asked in an interview, perhaps, what is array destructuring? They'll go, yeah, that's just a really quick way to do those 3 lines all in 1 line. That's all I'm doing. Very, very common. You'll never see it like this. You will always see useState done like this. Always. Okay. useState, of course, you can give it either nothing. That's fine. And you'll literally get nothing. I think it's undefined. You get undefined in useState, or you can give it an initial value, which means I want to start my counter off at 0. So give it a 0. Okay. Okay, so now got my code, but now I can't do counter plus plus, can I? Not a good thing. Well, because it's a constant. Well, I can fix that. Let's make it let. Okay. Let's try it. See what we get. Click me. Let's watch our console, click me, button click 2. It's still not changing the counter. What's going on? It's still not changing my counter. I'm clearly just not good at this at all. Like, I'm really bad. Not enough Kanye. Yes, we got to get Kanye in here fast. So my counter is changing. I've got my state, but of course, I'm not saving the counter. I'm just saying counter plus plus. That's all. I'm counter plus, it's always 0. What happens is my use state says, when it runs on line 7, this means give me the last value that was saved in React memory. It saves it with some really cool save React space. So the next time the function runs, it can get it out again. But I'm never using it. I'm not setting counters. So I can't do counter plus plus. What I need to do is set counter to counter, oops, counter plus 1. Counter, that is a good spelling. Counter plus 1. Okay, and this can be a constant here. You always see constant, you don't see lets in the use state. Okay, all right. What I'm doing now is when I click my button, I am now set counters. I'm going to save counter plus 1 into that special place that React saves it. So when this function re-renders, it will then, on line 7, get the current value or the last value that was saved back in counter. And hooray, we finally have a counter. Never has man spent so long getting a counter to work as it did today. There we go. We have a counter working. Awesome. We love counters. Counters never let you down. You can count on counters. Okay, so we spent a lot of time on a button, but really we covered a lot of things. We covered we had to use the on-click, which is the built-in. You get that for free. That comes with, this is not React. On-click is JavaScript and HTML. This is the basic DOM. That's built into an HTML button on-click. We gave it a function button click. Let's trace what happens here. Okay, so I'm gonna refresh my page. Brand new render. It said rendering app component first time. So it ran line 5. It then set my initial value to 0 of my counter. It got a function I can use. It printed the words, or sorry, it put click me inside button text, and then set up a function called button click. And then it returned my div, my button, and my counter there. I'm going to click me. Rendering app, the whole thing ran again. Every time you do something, the whole function runs again. This is a big takeaway. When you render a component, your whole component function runs from the start again. Not just a piece of it, the whole thing runs when it renders, which means I clicked. So when I clicked click me, it ran a button click. My button click set counter plus 1. It saved 1, 0 plus 1 to state. Great. Then I printed the word button clicked. 0. Oh, look at that. Well, counter's still 0, isn't it? It didn't change. I saved counter plus 1, but my counter was still 0. I didn't change it. I didn't go counter plus plus, which, by the way, you should not do. And Andy will talk about that more tomorrow, why it's really, really bad to change your values of your current state. All right. And then it ran my whole function. It said rendering app component again. It ran the whole thing over again from the start. Rendering app component got counter, but this time use state said, hey, wait a second, you've saved a counter. I'm going to give you back the one you saved. Great. You're going to get 1 here now. And by the way, here's another function you can use. Okay, great. Okay. Button that clicks me, function for my stuff again, and my render. Okay, my button and counter equals the new counter. Now I got a 1. Awesome. This is great. So this is how state works. Very important. It lets a variable survive a re-render. Okay. Had enough of buttons? We kind of a lot of button, haven't we? So let's do something else more fun. Okay. All right. So one thing, I'm going to change gears a little bit here, and we're going to do something more fun. Let's do a list. Lists are fun. You know, all kinds of cool things with lists. So, like lists of quotes, for instance, that's kind of cool. Okay. So let's try a list. So I'm going to clear this out. I'll leave a button there. I kind of like my button. So I'll leave a button here. Let's, at the end here now, let's put a list. So, of course, speaking of buttons, we can also build a list inside our app, can't we? We could do a UL. UL, like that. And I could build a list, you know, an LI. And I could say, you know, item 1, 2, 3, 4, just like that. And look at that. It renders. To no surprise, I'm putting it in there. That's kind of cool. Okay. What I can also do is I can do this. I can build my list here instead. I could say, well, tell me what, I want to have a list here, const, call it list for lack of an imaginative names, equals, and let's make a list. Just like this. And inside our list, let's put this stuff. Oops. Take that, come on, cut and paste. There. Of course, it needs to have commas because it's a list. Clearly not JavaScript, but perfectly valid JSX, isn't it? There we go. Now I have a list. Now this is the beauty of JSX. Remember, in our EGS, we would have had to have gone for an counter to loop through all of our list. But in React, we don't have to do that. We simply say list. But of course, it says the word list. Rule number 1, I have to put there. And look at that. It expands my list for me automatically. Now that's cool. Look at that. It built my list. I didn't have to do for list or for LI of LIs or for item of items. I didn't have to do anything here. I simply made me a list. That's cool. I love it. So this is where React is really powerful. You simply say, I want the list there. And then you take care of it, React. Unlike jQuery, we have to go, okay, for item of items or for tweet of tweets, okay, make a tweet and then, you know, append the tweet to my LI or find my UL first, you know, so $, you know, pound UL, append tweet. No, I just say my list goes there. So lists are really cool in React, just to say it. And if I add one more thing to my list, well, there we go. If my list changes, my data changes, my list changes. So this is what's called a controlled component. That's a word you hear a lot in React. Controlled component. The component is controlled by the data that it gets. So if this variable, which is this data for my component, changes, the component renders differently. It's a control component. It's a list, right? Okay. Let's try something more fun. Okay. Let's go ahead and give it some data. So, I mean, this is fine, but this is a hard-coded list, isn't it? I mean, it's great, but I'd rather do something more useful, like maybe downloading some quotes from some REST service somewhere that I can't quite think of at the moment. Okay, so we would normally build our lists or a list out of, you know, some data that we got from someplace. So now I'm not going to get into fetching data here because one thing, React doesn't have a built-in way to do AJAX calls like jQuery's. React is much simpler. That's like in jQuery, that's built in. You get, you know, AJAX.get or .ajax. None of that in React. It doesn't have that. We have to use external functions like Axe just to do that. I'm not going to be covering that today because we're going to be covering that on Wednesday when we talk about data fetching. So today we're going to put some like dummy data, much like we did in Tiny App. Let's build ourselves a little database up here. So we'll just make ourselves a little array, you know, const. You know, we'll call it I don't know, const data. Huh. There, we'll make an array of data for ourselves. There. we'll imagine that we got this data back from some website. Okay, so I'm going to put some stuff in here. I'm going to have my website return some objects. Okay, so I need these two. I'll take two really cool quotes out of here. There we go. So now my data has two objects. By the way, this is exactly what we get back from the Kanye.rest site. We get back ID and a quote, and it's an array of objects, right? So I got an array of objects. Cool. Okay. So I have an array of objects, but I got a bit of a problem because my code looks like this, or my list looks like this. But what I have is I have this. I don't get back li, my biggest regret, backslash li from Kanye, do I? He's not going to send me that. He's going to send me data. So I've got this array, my list. That's the array that I want. But the array that I've got is this array. So I wouldn't mind getting, probably get this. Like that'd be fun if I could just put that in there, just like that. And sure. There. So that works, right? So if only there is some way for me to convert one array into another array. If only, right? So what can I use to convert one array to another? Because that'd be great. I've got these two items here, and I want this like this. So map, yes, we use map. Very, very, very common in React is map. Usually on a list is map, like right away, map. So we want to convert one array, this data, into another array. Now map is a very specific purpose. It's when you want to end up with pretty much the same number of array items, just modified somehow. Kind of like the array, but it's not the way you like it. I mean, that's right. This isn't bad, but I want it to look like this. So we use the map. Very, very common. And the way that looks like is this. So we have list is data dot map. And the map function, or the map function of, or the map array function takes another function, and let's go item or something, call that item or I, doesn't matter, item, and then whatever you return from this function is what gets put in the new array. Well, that's cool. Return something. So return, well, I'm going to return an li. Here. Got two li's. And inside my li's, I want to have, well, there's my item. Each item is an object. So I have item dot quote. So why don't I say item dot quote? Cool. Huh. Well, I just added a quote. I've done something wrong. Of course, rule number 1 of JSX, I'm inside pointy brackets now. You can't go back. So any JavaScript now has to be surrounded by curly braces, just like that. Look at that. And I've got some just awesome quotes in my React app. Isn't that great? I'm really proud. Okay, great. That's cool. Do something more fun. Let's actually put our data someplace else. Or rather, let's make our data more dynamic. Because right now I'm mapping that. Why don't I do this following instead? Or do the following. Why don't I allow myself to change my list in real time? Because right now it's fixed, right? This data.map. It's not, there's no way to change this map or this mapped list. So, but it is obviously controlled by data. So if data changes, that means my map is going to change. Let's try that here. Let's just add one more item. And it did. Look at that. So if my data changes, my whole component changes. So clearly, if I was just to fetch another one and put it on my data, my map's going to run again because it re-renders, and it's going to display my stuff. That's cool. So let's make this more live. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to start, but of course I need state, because right now, if something needs to change, I need some state to put my data list in, because this is fixed. So I need a place to put my list. So now, build myself a list. I'm going to call it quote list or quote data, and set quote data. And I'll start off with an empty array, and that'll become clear why I'm doing that in just a moment. Okay, quote data. And now I'm going to have my map now map my quote data. It's like that. Okay. Of course, nothing displays. Of course, why? Well, because my quote data is empty. It's an empty array. Now, the reason I initialized my quote data with an empty array is this. If I had done an empty array, guess what's going to happen? Anybody want to guess what happened if I initialize quote data with an empty array? Spoiler, this is something you will see. I can guarantee you, because I've made this mistake a zillion times. Let's try it, see what happens. Ah, yes, quote data is undefined. That's correct, or can't read out undefined. That's what, there's no such thing as map. Map is, I'm trying to do undefined dot map. Really nasty error, right? It's undefined. If you don't give it initial value in use state, you get undefined. So since I'm always doing a map, whenever this function renders, it's going to call right from the top again, get the quote data, set the button text, set the function, and it's going to try to map my quote data. If it's undefined, it's not going to work. I had to start with an empty array, so at least the map works. It doesn't crash any first time. Great. So now, do something else. Let's now go and make my button go and fetch my data. We're going to pretend we're going to go fetch the quotes from Kanye, right, on a button click. No, because we can't do an AJAX call because that's Wednesday's lecture. So we'll just fake it. We'll just say, we'll do a set data or set quote data to our dummy data that we saved up here, just like that. There. Whoops, data. So now our button is going to increment a counter, and it's going to pretend it did a fetch for some website and set our data. Let's try that. Okay, let's trace what's going to happen now. If I click me, and this is an important skill, by the way, so this is important to remember. When I click me, let's trace what's going to happen in our app. This is very important to understanding how your app works. And when you get bugs, it helps be able to trace it. So I'm going to click me. Okay, click me is here. It's the on click for my button. It's going to call my function my button click. And by the way, I could, yes, have made this an inline function. I could have done, the whole thing as an inline function, but we almost always make a named function. This makes it easier, right? So it's going to call my button click function. Okay, it's going to set counter to counter plus 1. It's going to change some state. Okay, it's also going to call set quote data. It's going to set quote data equal to this test data, changing some state. React goes, oh, wait a second, looks like some state's changed. When the function's finished, it's going to go, state has changed, time to re-render. Okay, starts right from the top again. Line 10, calls function app. It's going to print out rendering app component. It's going to get the previously saved 0 plus 1, so we get 1. It's going to get the last previously saved, which is now my new data. Put in data. It's going to my button text again. Get rid of that. New function. It's then going to map my list, but this time quote data has changed. It's got stuff in it. Great. And then it calls my return. Once again, that's showtime. Everything's been set up now. All actors in place. They've learned their lines. You haven't got some guy banging some background scenery when the curtain goes up. It's like, oops, oh no, quick. No, show starting. It's going to my div, show my button, and it's going to show my counter, and it's going to expand my Loo list. Let's watch that in action. Okay, and it works just like that. Cool. Okay, let's put some more quotes in there. I've got a couple more quotes that I grabbed. Let's grab a couple more. Hold on. Copy this. Hold on. There. Oops. There we go. I have 5 cool quotes. But these aren't Kanye quotes, are they? Okay, here's the contest. Guess the quoter. Okay. In my body, where the shame gland should be, there is another awesome gland. Who said that? Come on. Anybody? Come on. Come on. You Gen Zs and millennials, come on. Michael Scott? Nope, this one. In my body, where the shame gland should be, is just another awesome gland. Anybody else? Starts with a B. Come on. Last name rhymes with Stetson. It's Barney. That's a Barney Stetson, right? Come on. All right. Yes. Number 4. I love inside jokes. I hope to be part of one someday. And of course, that's a Michael quote. That's a Michael Scott quote, of course. Yes. How about this one? There's been a mistake. You've accidentally given me the food that my food eats. Ron Swanson. Yes, exactly. That's a Ron Swanson joke or quote. Exactly. Okay, let's try this. I have now, of course, more data. When I click, I'm going to fetch more data from my website. Let's give it a try. Okay. And it worked the same way. Cool. All right. On Thursday, we'll make these live. We're just, Thursday, by the way, is probably the most fun lecture of the entire bootcamp. It's called ominously, or has the ominous name of custom hooks. Ooh, sounds really scary. No, it's like totally easy. Thursday's session is like the most fun we're going to have. Custom hooks, because custom hooks are like so easy. More Kanye, yes, more Kanye, more Michael, and maybe some Dwight thrown in there too. Custom hooks are one of the simplest concepts in React. Unbelievably so. It just has this ominous name of custom hooks, but it's fun. So yeah, Thursday, we're going to do these things live and do some really cool stuff with some really cool custom hooks. Okay. So this is a controlled list, very, very common in React using map. By the way, here's another takeaway. When you build your component, put the star of the show right before the return. So right now, the star of my show is my list. So I kind of put my list right there. That's not really a requirement. Just, I like to do this when I'm doing, especially when I'm doing list components. Put your list as the last thing before you return, just so you know like where it was right there. Okay, build my list, and then it's like your stars, like your leading lady, your leading man. You know, they want to be the top billing, right? Like I don't like they're the most important. They're temperamental. They're egotistical, right? They want to be the last thing the director sees before the curtain rises. So the director is like, he's the last guy. Man, you're awesome. You're great. They love you. Get out there. They love you. Okay, curtain rises, and there he is. You know, like a play. Okay, so I make the last thing my actor, my main actor, before my return. It's one of those things I like to do. Okay, that's a controlled list. Very, very cool. You'll see a lot of them. Let's do one more component. Then we're going to build some kind of complex components. We'll make about 15 minutes overtime today, or 15 rather, overtime. We'll build one more controlled component. It's an input. Input, of course, is text. So input looks like this. We'll put an input. I'll put it right before the button, maybe. Put it here. Input. So make an input. Input. Equals text, like that. And by the way, while we're doing this, let's do one more thing with our list before I forget. Let's take a look at if we're getting any messages from React. Look at DevTools, okay? Console and component. Oh, fresh. There we go. I'm getting a warning from React. It's only a warning. Things ran fine, but I got a warning. It says each child in a list should have a unique key prop. You will see this many times in React. Now, you can ignore it. I don't like ignoring it. You can, it'll run, but it'll run less efficiently. Because what happens is React has no way of knowing if one of these changes, like one of them, it has no way of knowing which one changed, so it re-renders them all. It has no choice. So what we do is we give each element, each of these LIs, if you will, a key prop or key attribute. We just say key equals something. Okay. Now, fortunately, Kanye and our other services, they in fact gave us a nice handy number that we can use, just like that. So in this case, we'll use the key. So key equals item.id. So this is one of those lesser rules of JSX. It's not one of those hard ones. We'll call it rule number 4, I guess, because it's not really, a breaking rule, but it's a good thing to follow. Is that every item in the list should have a unique key. Just give it a key. It's not hard. You can even do a map, and you can get get the key out of it as well using the map, because it gives you a second parameter to your map is an I. We try to avoid that. We try to use something we got back, and chances are you're going to get something back from your web service or something with an ID or some kind of index that you can use. It's very common. So, okay. So rule number 4 is using unique key. Okay. On to inputs. So we have an input that literally does nothing, but it works. I can type stuff in, but it doesn't do much, does it? So input's more of a complex or complicated control component. We have to do a couple of things with it. 2 things with input. It has a value, the stuff inside. Remember jQuery.val? The stuff inside the input. That's the value, or the val. Let's make it a little smaller. There we go. Okay, there we go. There's the stuff. That's the value. So we want to be able to change that value and be able to get it out again. So I want to store or have that state input be managed somehow. Okay. So I'm going to probably need to put that someplace, right? So I got to make some state for it because it's going to change. Input, let's call it input, and set input, just like that. We'll use state, and I'll start with an empty string. Now I have some state. On my input, when you build an input, it has 2 attributes that we use. The value equals, we said before, input value equals something. We've done this in TinyApp and Twitter. So input value equals something. So a value. So value equals my input. So I didn't forget this time. Input. There we go. Input. Great. So input value equals input. So now what happens is when I start typing, nothing changes. Isn't that weird? Nothing changes, and it's not re-rendering, is it? So nothing is happening, because what I've said, of course, is value equals input. Well, input is empty string. It never changed. So value is always input. No matter what I do, the value is always going to be input. So, and I'm getting a warning from React. A very useful warning, by the way. It says a component is changing an uncontrolled to a controlled component. This is likely to change the value, blah, 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 blah. Basically, it means decide which one to use. You need to have a way to change the value. It's noticing that I'm setting the value, but I've given it no way to change the value. This looks fishy to React. So you've got this value equals, but you have no way to change it. Are you sure that's what you want? Like, I don't think so. I think you're doing something wrong here. So maybe choose something different. In fact, in this case, I've forgotten one part of the input. So an input component takes 2 things, a value and an on change. Remember we did the on change in Twitter. On change, we counted the characters in the value. So you also need an on change function equals something. Okay. Of course, I gave it a string. It expects a function. Look, I expected on change to be a function, buddy. What's going on? You should give me a function. Very useful, React, isn't it? So it wants a function. So I got to give it a function. So let's make a function. And I can call a function anything I want, anything. I'm going to call onChange because I can't think of a better name. Okay. Now the onChange function, when it runs, when you change something, function. When you change something, it gets an event. That's just what you get. How do I know that? Well, I looked it up. Okay, the onChange function, you get an event. In fact, all handlers, you get an event. You get the event. I'm just not using it in the button click, so I didn't bother including it. So, but an onChange, you need that event. And the value, the current content of that input is what's called event dot target dot value. There. That is the contents of that input. Of course, that doesn't do me any good. What I need to do is I need to change input to be event dot target dot value. It sounds rather complex, and it kind of is. So inputs are kind of one of the more complex ones, but fortunately, they all look the same. So once you learn it once, you know it forever. It never changes. There. Now I have a function called onChange that will take the contents of my input and change the value so it shows inside the input. Okay, let's try that. Now I can make my function. I can say onChange equals onChange. Oh, need my curly braces. There we go. Okay, let's try it. So now when I type, look at this, I'm rendering every single time I'm typing. Look at that, I'm rendering every time you type something. It re-renders the app every single time. So don't forget that. When anything changes, this whole function runs again. The whole thing runs again from scratch. It gets the last input, saves that input, which means it can now render value equals input. Inputs are really cool because like you're actually not seeing what you're typing, you're seeing what's rendering the next time. You type that 5 there, that 5 triggers your onChange, which saves the 5 that the internal DOM got, or the browser's DOM got. It then saves that, causes a state change, causes the whole function to run again, which then gets my previous input from here, then causes the return to run, which then says value equals input. It's pretty cool. It sounds a bit complicated, but it's not that bad. And inputs, we use them all the time. And once you've used it a couple of times, it gets pretty easy to use. Look at that. And in fact, let's just put the input someplace. Let's put it below our counter. Yeah, let's put it here. Let's just say input. Why not? Input right there, just for fun. Refresh our page. Okay, let's type some stuff. 1, there it is. Declarative, right? I'm not saying we'll find that, well, there is no div. It's just hanging out, there's nothing. I guess I'm looking for the div. In jQuery, I couldn't do that. I would have to find div and then find its 1, 2, 3, find its 4th child and replace that HTML of the 4th child with my stuff. Do it again. Put 2 of them there. There. That's the power of React. It's all declarative. I can simply put stuff where I want, and if that thing changes, the rendering just automatically changes. So whatever I change here, there. Just put a BR. More obvious. BR. I hate using BRs, but I'll use them here for now. There we go. Okay. There we go. So that's my stuff. Okay, so that's an input. It is a little more complex. It needs 2 things. It needs a place to put the value, value equals just some state, and it's a function to change or to save that thing so you can carry on. Okay. Let's do a couple more things, and then we'll get into things like props. So let's about 10 minutes about props. Let's talk about dev tools quickly. It's very, very useful. Right now, we're kind of guessing. Fortunately, Chrome, Firefox, and all of them, they have the built-in dev tools, and you can either install or sometimes it comes free, the React dev tools, and it has this in it. It lets you, oops. There we go. Okay. Come on, components, profile components. There we go. App, there's an app component. It lets you look at your app kind of from an overall view. I only have one React component in this application right now. It's called app. It's function. I only have one component, so there's my function. But it shows me, look, I've got an app. I have some state. I have one state of 0. I have another state. The second one is an empty array, and the third one's an empty string. That's kind of cool. If I type stuff, I hit 1. Oh, look, my third state, 1, 2, third state there, changed to a 1. Now it's a 2, 1, 2, 2, a 3, a 4. So the dev tools or the React dev tools is very, very useful. It lets you visualize what's going on in your state, because really state is so important. It drives everything. As we can tell here, these are all state now. The stuff on our screen now is controlled, or in the browser is controlled by the state. When I click me, that's controlled by the state of my quote data. So I want to see quote data. Well, there it is. Oh, quote data. My third state or my second state has stuff in it. Look at that. Okay, there we go. So it has some state, my objects, which get mapped to my li array. So DevTools is very useful. Okay. Let's talk about props. We say the best for last. Props are usually the biggest cause of concern or ARs really in the whole week, but they really are quite simple. We're going to build ourselves another component. Normally I'd build a component in a different file, but I'm just going to be lazy. I'm going to build it here. I'm going to make a component called button. And what is a React component? Well, a React component is the following thing. It is a function called button. So a React component is a function, but it's not just any function. It's a function that returns JSX. So that is the definition of a React functional component, or React component, from our perspective. A function that returns JSX. So right now I've got a function, but this is not a component. Why? Because it does not return JSX. To turn this into a function, what do? Well, let's return some JSX. Make a return statement. Return. There. And let's make it the world's smallest function. Returns a fragment. Oops, hold on. I better do it the proper way. Come on. Oh, I can't do it. It's not self-closing. There we go. Okay. We can't self-close a fragment. Guess it makes sense. Okay. So now I have literally the world's simplest and most useless React component. It literally, or it satisfies all the requirements of a React component. It's a function, it says function, that return JSX fragment. There you go. I got a function. Cool. So let's make a button. I'm going to return a button. So button and end button. Okay. So let's delete some of our stuff from our there. See myself up there. There we go. Okay. I now have a button component called button. It's pretty simple. Now, interesting, you may notice I use the new way, or the ES6 way of declaring a function, const button equals function. Did you notice that React didn't do that here? You may wonder this, like, why did they use this old school function? We learned this in interview number 1. Like, that's kind of not the best way to do it, is it? Well, you're kind of right. The reason they did that is it allows you to do this. It's the only reason. It allows you to, instead of having export default app there, you can take that and just go export default function app. That's all. It makes your life easier. That's all. You can save a line. Other than that, I have no idea why they did it, but I know you can do this. If you want to write, just go export default function this. I don't know. I tend to like doing that and having the export at the end there. export default function button, although it's not necessary. I'm in the same file. So this line is completely unnecessary in this file because it's right there. This function C button. But normally, if this was its own file, which we'll do later on, it would have the export default. Not needed right now because it's there. So now I have a button. Okay. Make my button say hello. Hello, button 2. Great. Okay. And is it? Rack was confused. Once again, if you get weird things happening in your browser and your code was good, just refresh your browser. It just Rack got confused. Actually, Webpack got confused, really. So, okay. Now I have a function or a component, capital B button. That's cool. I can call that component. I can. Let's call it. In fact, let's put our button right before our input. Put it here. Let's call button. Button. There's our button. Look at that. Hello button 2. There's our component. We just created a new component, which is just a function that returns JSX. That's all a component is, a function that returns JSX. In this case, returns a button. Cool. Okay. And there's our button. Of course, not terribly useful yet because we can't change this stuff. So let's talk about props. This is where the props come in. We'll spend about 10 minutes talking props, and I promise let you guys go. So normally, a component will have a parameter. We call it props. Does it have to be called props? No, it doesn't. You can call it, Bruno. It's my dog's name. Like this high. Okay, Bruno. Little dog with a big name. But we call it props because it's like everyone calls it props. And we're like lemmings. We tend to follow everyone else. So props. Props. Even app can have props. And yes, people have asked, can it have props? Yes, it can have props, and it can use it. Called index.js. We don't normally see props in your app component, so we won't do it, but you can. But most other components will get a props. Okay. So how do I use props? What do I do with these props? It's like, okay, I got this props thing. What's it good for? Well, here's the magic about props, and it really is not any more complex than this. Let's say I don't want to say hello button 2. I want to say something else. I want to make my button component be able to say anything, like anything I want. I don't know, something. I want to say, well, I don't care. So I want my button to be kind of general purpose. So really, my props, I want to be a parameter to my component. Remember, a JavaScript component is a function, and we know we can pass parameters to functions. So there must be a way to pass parameters to a component the same way. Well, there is. There's my button. I'm calling my button component. In effect, as far as React is concerned, I'm calling the button function this way, aren't I? So how do I pass parameters to it? Well, I could simply say text equals, hello from app. Great. Well, nothing's changing. I made this text thing, hello from app, but nothing changed. Well, of course not, because I didn't tell my button to use text. So what I can do is I can put my props dot text there. Well, no, it's a prop dot text. Why? Because I broke rule number 1. I need curly braces. So curly braces, props dot text. Hello from app. So you may be asking, well, does it have to be called text? No, it doesn't. I wrote this thing called button. I could have called this anything I wanted. Props.Bruno. Sure, nothing there because it wasn't passed. So now I have to make this Bruno equals hello from app. And it works again. So here's the secret. If it is an attribute here, Bruno equals, or text equals, or something equals that, that name shows up as a props dot something in your component. That's it. That's as complicated as it gets with props. There's one other thing we'll talk about, but it's even more simple. So when you're tracing props, And you will this week. You'll be tracing props all the way down. Okay, interviewer here. Oh, it changed names. Now it's called ID. Okay, now it's ID. Well, now it changed back. What's going on? But just make sure you know when you call your component, take a look. What am I calling it with? I'm calling it with Bruno equals hello from app. Okay, let's go to my button. Go to my button. There better be a thing called props.bruno, and there is. Let's make it text. There. Once again, props.text. So now a button doesn't work. Why doesn't a button work? What's going on? Why isn't it working? Let's find out. I'm sending Bruno equals hello from app. Okay, let's go to my component. So oftentimes control click will take you there. Okay, and oh, props.text. Oh yeah, of course, I'm sending Bruno. It's got to be text. So to use this button, I've got to send it text. So I've got to send it text equals hello from app. There. So rule number 0 of JSX, how's that? Even more important than curly braces is if you have an attribute to your component, something equals something, text equals, Bruno equals, anything equals, that thing shows up in the component up here as props.thatthing. That's it, they got to match. So if you're wondering, why is my interviewer not showing? What's going on? I'm giving it interview equals. It's like, oh, wait a second, it's interviewer equals. Oh, and I'm going props.interview. Well, that's why. It's typo, maybe capital, case spelling. So when you're tracing props, look where you're calling the component, text equals that thing, then look at the component. Does it have props.text? Yes, it does, and it works. So that's a big one. Please, please write that one down or remember it. It is really like the top rule. It's now bump number 1. This is the new number 1 rule. Props and attributes are tightly tied. If it's an attribute down here, it's a prop up here. And more importantly, if someone has written a component that says, you got to give it this prop, it expects a prop called text. Well, then when you use that component, you have to give it a text. Okay. We'll talk about more things later on, but one more thing we'll talk about props. It's a very small one. There's also a special prop we can use in React that you get for free. It's always there. It's called props.children. Props.children. Children. You get this one for free every time. It's always there. Props.children. Cool. What does that mean? Well, it means everything inside when you call the component. So now I can put my text in here and go, hello, children. That's pretty. Hello, children. There, okay. All right. And props.children is the children of the component that you are calling. So props.children. We don't use it as often. It's got some really cool uses. I'll do it in an Iconics API lecture in a few weeks here. But it's used in a couple of the cool cases. Not using it so much in this week at all, but it's good to know. Props.children. Okay. So we've covered up pretty much most of props and components. One more kind of cool thing we could do with this button click, or rather with this button, is not only can we pass values as props, we can pass functions as props. And we do a lot. Because now this function is, or this button is kind of useful, but it doesn't do anything, does it? I can't make it do anything. There's no on click. So how am I going to pass an on click to this thing? Because here's my button click is here, right? So I want a way to be able to send my button click to my button. Well, why don't I simply pass that as a prop? Button click. Why don't I say, what can I call this thing? On click, that's so boring. What else can I use? Attribute. I mean, actually, on click's pretty good. Let's call it clicker. Clicker. Once again, the name is entirely up to me. It's my code. Clicker equals, and I'm going to say my button click. My button click. Now I'm passing the prop clicker to the button component. Cool. Well, click was a function. Well, that's kind of cool. So I can use clicker here. And since, remember, at the end of the day, everything is an HTML component, I could say inside my button on click equals props dot, fill in the blank, what should it be called? Props dot what? Quick. Props dot something. Clicker, clicker,
Clicker.
clicker. Yes, props dot clicker. Of course, it's because it's got to be clicker because it clicker equal. So it's props dot clicker. Props dot clicker. There we go. Yes, I gave it clicker equals. So I better have a thing called props dot clicker in my component, and I do. So now, hello children. Let's change this to click me. Look exactly the same. So call it click me. Oh, put our text. Why not? We'll put a button text in there. There. Put that there. Click me, click me. Looks the same. They're clones. Which one's which? Which one's our component? Which one's our new button? I'm not sure. Let's see. See, they behave the same. So I'm going to click my button. So here's my component. Now my button's here. I think it's that one. Let's hope so. It's got an on click. It's going to call props.clicker. What's props.clicker? Well, props.clicker is, let's go down. It's clicker equals, it's my button click. Okay, it's my function here. So I'm hoping that when I click my button, it's going to call my function I passed down to it and call this function. Let's take a look. And it worked. Hey, that's the wrong one. Let's try it again. Oh, they work the same. They're indistinguishable. Inconceivable. Wow. Where's that quote from? Old movie quotes. That's one of my specialties. Okay, cool. All right. So props. Not only can you pass values, you can pass functions. And we do a lot of that. A lot. We pass behavior down. Andy will talk about this more tomorrow. So don't worry. Tomorrow, Andy will be talking about this again. I believe it's Andy. And he'll be expanding on this, talk about data update patterns, how we do clever ways of doing this set counter plus one, other ways of doing set state as well, or set counter using the previous methods, more advanced stuff. Today we cover up the basics, but real important things. Remember the 4 rules now? Can't remember. What's number 1 rule? Quickly. Number 1 rule is attributes are props. Well, that was the old number 1, the curly braces. Now the new number 1 is attributes or props. Number 2, which was number 1, is curly braces. Yes, if you're inside markup, once you've gone pointy, you can't go back. So here, I've gone pointy. I can't go back, which means everything that is JavaScripty has to have curly braces around it. So that's a function, that's a function, so curly braces. Number 3, what's number 3? What was number 3? Was that the key equals bump off the class names? One parent, yes, that's right, one parent. Number 3, there's 5 things then. Yeah, one parent. So you gotta have one parent, exactly. You can't have things with more. I couldn't put another button here. Can't do that. Must be wrapped. But let's say I had a component. I did want to have 2 buttons in my component. Did you want a fragment? Yes, I did want a fragment. Thank you, React. I will do that. So I can do this by putting my fragment. Whoops, do that. Good old VS Code autocomplete screws me again. There we go. And now it works. I guess 3 of them. Which one's which? So they're all the same, of course. Yeah, there we go. In fact, I don't even need this button here, do I? There. 2 buttons. Or I could make 1 button there and call it record again. Just have a second button, just like that. And here's the power of components. I can use them again. I can put a button there, or I can put a button there. Now it's the same component exactly. I'm just calling the same thing twice with the 0 code, right? Look at that. And they both do the same thing. I need a clear button, don't I? Should I spend like 30 seconds to make a clear button? Let's do that. Make it 30 seconds. We'll do one more clear button. hold on, we're gonna clear button. On click, we're gonna make a function called clear. Function, whoops, no, not describe. Function. Come on. There we go. We'll call it clear. Why not? Function. Let's clear all our stuff. Let's set our counter equals 0. So we'll set counter 0. And we'll set our data, or set our quote data. Quote data to an empty array. There. Cool. Okay. Clear. That's about it. Call it clear. And let's make our button. Let's make our second button. Now it's going to say clear, right? It's going to say clear. That's cool. Oops, clear. There. It's going to say clear. There. And it's going to call my clear function. Cool. Just a minor tweak. Same component, just a different attribute. So now, click me. When I call clear, if I haven't messed up, and that never happens, of course, it should clear. So it's going to call my clear function, and whew, first time. That worked first time. All right, cool. So yes, so click me clear. Look, I have a fully functional quote app. Look at me. Awesome. Okay. So that was number 3, same parrot. Of course, also we need the unique key for our lists. So getting down the priority list, you kind of really want to have a unique key for a list. And then the class name, you have to use class name, not class. There's our 5 rules we covered. 1, 2, 3, 4, yes, 5 rules of JSX. Remember them. Okay, that covers off our basic. There's not a lot to it, is there? There's like 5 things to remember. Not even that. This is like, it's a template. Stuff you put in your return ends up on your browser. That's React, right? There's not much to it. It is not this big monster. jQuery is really scary compared to React. You got to do all this manipulation of like, oh, I got to find the ID. Why is it not working? Oh, it's the wrong ID. Oh, I have 2 of them. Now, what the heck? With React, you just put my thing there. Like, look at this, line 59. Put my list there. I know my list is going to go there. I don't have to worry about getting some jQuery ID messing up for me. It's right there. It's way easier, in my opinion, than jQuery. So only a few things to remember. Build your template, make it look nice. Try not to do a lot of stuff in here. You could have actually done this. I don't recommend this. You could have actually done this whole thing. You could have done that. And you will see this, hold on, there. You will see people doing this. It's like, what the heck? Why are you doing JavaScript in the middle of your show? That should have been done before. That list should have been built and just said list. But you see this all the time. You'll download some really crappy React code online that does stuff like this. So no, don't do that. Oops. Build your list or build your sets before the curtain rises, before the show starts. It's there, it's all built. There's not some guy looking at the audience going, oh, sorry, putting the set together. It's all done. Okay. So once again, there's not a lot to React here. There's a couple more hook stuff. There's some cool hooks for fetching data, or what you use when you want to fetch data, or when things change. Kind of the equivalent of document.ready. We cover that on I think on Thursday, Wednesday rather. And we do some custom hooks Thursday, which is really cool. So, okay, I'll let you guys go. I know we're going over time. Sorry, React always does. We did cover the basics. Don't forget the 5 rules and remember the props. If nothing else, just remember the props thing. If it is an attribute when you call the component, it's going to end up as a prop when inside the component. Etch that into your memory. Okay. All right. Okay. Enough of my rant for today. So I'll be around all day. I'm here all week. This is my busy week. I do a lot of the React stuff. So this scheduler app is challenging, but it's mostly JavaScript challenging. As you can see, there's not a lot to React. It's all the other stuff we do, the maps, the passing parameters and stuff. So, okay, I will see you guys later. Have fun. See you all week.
Thank you.